Hello, Earthlings. This is Dave with another episode of And Another Thing with Dave. All right, thanks for tuning in. In this episode, I want to reach out and thank some of our new listeners from countries such as India, Australia, New Zealand, Bahrain, Ireland, all over the place. We've got so many new listeners from so many new places. I want to say thank you. I'm also starting a couple new platforms. I'm starting to do comedy, character voices, and some interviews. You can catch me on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram as And Another Thing with Dave. You can also catch me on the new Stereo app as And Another Thing. All right, so in this episode, I want to get into a little discussion on homelessness. This is a huge, huge issue here in the United States, has been for quite some time, and the problem really began during the Reagan administration, kind of exploded during that era, and has only gotten worse since. Under Obama, during Occupy, 5 million people in the U.S. lost their homes, were evicted from their homes. Currently, the city of Los Angeles has something like 50,000 homeless people, and they are now experiencing a resurgence of diseases from the Middle Ages, things like cholera and the Black Plague, due to the horrific conditions that these people are living in. So I want to get into this. I've got an article that I'm going to pull up here from, NPR, and I just want to read a little bit of this and get into it. It's the richest country in the face of the world. There's no excuse for the U.S. having an absolutely homeless epidemic. So, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Now, let me rewind a little bit here. The U.S. is the only industrialized nation that does not have universal health care and free college education. And even in the middle of a pandemic, we can't seem to get our politicians to rally behind universal health care. If not now, then when? If not in the middle of a pandemic, then when? Even just for the fact that, these homeless camps are now disease cesspools that risk perpetuating this pandemic and others. So let's get into this article. This is by NPR, KQED, from March 18th, 2021, written by Pam Fessler. The article is HUD. Growth of homelessness during 2020 was devastating even before the pandemic. The nation's homeless population grew last year for the fourth year in a row. On a single night in January 2020, there were more than 580,000 individuals who were homeless in the United States, a 2% increase from the year before. I know personally that the homeless population in San Francisco is about 1% of the population, and only a fraction of those have a bed to sleep on at night. The city does not have sufficient services and hasn't ever really had sufficient services for the number of people that they experience. I've also talked to police officers. I lived in San Francisco for 20 years, worked downtown for a good number of those years, and I developed good rapport with a number of different beat cops. Spoke with a veteran officer of the San Francisco Police Department. He told me that he has seen this firsthand on a number of occasions where a person will get arrested in another city in the United States, and they'll offer them a bus ticket to San Francisco instead of going to jail. They'll ask the person, you want to go to jail, or do you want a one-way bus ticket to California, where it's warmer, there's social programs, right? So think about this. So now the whole nation is sending their homeless to San Francisco, which makes San Francisco look bad, right? So the conservatives can play on that. Oh, look how it's working there. Meanwhile, they're sending their people there, right? And then you think about how it taxes the system. Well, now California has to come up with money for all these to take care of all these people that came from all over the country because it just happens to be easier to live as a homeless person in California where you're not going to freeze to death 90% of the time. You know, it does happen, but as a rule, it's a better place than New York City for sure. You know, people die there in huge numbers every year. So there's that, right? So we really need a national solution because you can't just be shifting the blame or the financial responsibility onto one state. It's a national problem. Okay, so back into the article. We know the pandemic has only made the homeless crisis worse. HUD Secretary Marcia Fudge said in a video message accompanying the report, she called the numbers devastating and said the nation has a moral responsibility to end homelessness. Among the report's more sobering findings, homelessness among veterans and families did not improve for the first time in many years. Also, more than 106,000 children were found homeless during a once-a-year count. Oh my God, let me just pause there for a moment. 106,000 children in the richest country in the history of the world. That's what you call a failed system, people. That's what you call a failed system. If we have the richest country in the world, you know, and we can't take care of, oh my God, wow. As has been the case for years, a disproportionate share of those experiencing homelessness were black, about 39% of the total, though African Americans make up about 13% of the nation's overall population. 23% of those who were homeless last year identified as Hispanic or Latino. California was home to the largest number of people experiencing homelessness, 161,548. Wow. Wow. That's more people than live in the city that I live in. That's larger than the population of the city I live in. Wow. A quarter of all homeless individuals in the United States were living either in New York City or Los Angeles. So there you go, a quarter. And why? Because there's programs there to take care of these people. So they flock there in massive numbers. And as I found out from a police officer, they're given bus tickets to go there. You know, this is unbelievable. Unbelievable numbers. For the first time since the government began doing an annual count, the number of single adults living outside, 209,413, exceeded the number of individuals living in shelters. Whoa. Let that sit in for a minute. There's more people living outside than there are living in shelters. Wow. I think it's tragic. We have an increasing unsheltered numbers, said Nan Roman, president and CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. We know that unsheltered people have horrible health conditions. Roman noted that these individuals are much more susceptible to disease, premature death, than those living inside. Of course, seems obvious to me, and I'm sure it is to everybody else as well. If you're living outside, you're going to be way more susceptible.